23 years ago, a man in Conway, New Hampshire, vanished while ice fishing on Lake Chocorua, disappearing without a trace and leaving behind a cold, empty house and a desperate wife. Authorities believed it was an accident caused by cracking ice, but no body was found. There was no clear evidence, and the investigation quickly stalled. However, in the years that followed, that wife never gave up hope, still believing that the truth about that winter day had never been told. Then, one early spring morning, as the lake's water level dropped, an unexpected discovery changed everything. A small detail hidden for 2 decades unlocked a secret no one could have imagined. Before diving deep into this shocking case, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next part. In the winter of 2002, Conway, a small town in northern New Hampshire, was blanketed in thick snow and a prolonged silence that stretched from the White Mountains down to Lake Chocorua. The narrow, winding roads were shrouded in cold fog, with only tire tracks and the howling wind through low rooftops remaining. Michael Warren, 31 years old, a real estate appraiser for a regional insurance company, lived with his wife Denise in a small house on Page Hill Road. He loved fishing and had once said that only when sitting alone on the frozen lake surface did he feel his mind truly at ease. That morning, while Denise was still brewing coffee, Michael put on his thick jacket, grabbed his fishing rod and old hunting rifle, and said he'd head to Lake Chocorua to try out his new gear. Just a couple hours, and I'll be back. She watched through the window as his silver SUV pulled out of the driveway, tires leaving imprints in the fluffy snow before vanishing into the thick fog. By noon, Denise called her husband's cell phone to ask if he wanted her to prepare dinner, but it just rang with no answer. In the afternoon, the wind picked up, and snow started falling heavier. By dusk, she still hadn't seen the car return. Denise called a few more times, each one longer, then shifted to real worry. She checked the garage, called her mother-in-law, Michael's friends, and even the company. No one knew where he'd gone. Outside on the porch, the yellow light cast down on the white snow, with only the morning tire tracks nearly covered over. As night fell, the clock in the living room ticked loudly and heavily. Denise sat by the landline, hands ice cold, repeating the thought that maybe the car had broken down or he was holed up somewhere. But nearing midnight, with no explanation left to calm her, Denise decided to call the Carroll County Sheriff's Office to report it. In the silent house, her voice trembled as she said, "My husband left this morning to go fishing at Lake Chocorua and hasn't come back yet." The call was forwarded to the dispatch center early the next morning, after the snow had stopped and the sky was still foggy. Sergeant Robert Healy was the first to read the summary report, which clearly noted the departure time, vehicle, physical description, and predicted route of Michael Warren. Cases like this weren't rare in winter, sometimes a stalled car, sometimes a fisherman venturing onto thin ice. But the detail that caught Healy's eye was Michael had never stayed out overnight, and his phone had been disconnected since the previous afternoon. He directed 2 patrol officers to immediately head along Route 16 toward Lake Chocorua. The road was narrow and slippery, with thick ice on the curves and dark pine forests on both sides. Around mid-morning, they spotted faint SUV tire tracks in the fresh snow, heading straight toward the lake and stopping at a small unmarked turnout. The whole area was silent, with only the wind sweeping through the branches. The 2 officers got out, probed the deep snow with sticks, finding no footprints, no skid marks, no signs of struggle or anyone walking away from the vehicle. An old wool glove lay half buried in the snow, but they couldn't determine who it belonged to. The initial scene report was sent back to headquarters, along with a map marking the tire track location. Healy reviewed the report carefully, noting possible vehicle stop near lake edge and requesting an expanded check within a 3-mile radius. By noon, snow started falling again, blurring the tracks. At the same time, Denise was invited to the sheriff's station to provide more information. She brought a photo of Michael from last year's hunting trip, described his jacket, boots, vehicle type, and added that her husband had taken his fishing rod and old hunting rifle. Those details were carefully recorded in Report Number 02-1747, marking the official opening of the Missing Person Urgent File. That afternoon, police contacted radio station WMWV in Conway to broadcast a missing person alert. The short bulletin aired 3 times that day. A 31-year-old man from Conway has been reported missing after going fishing at Lake Chocorua. Anyone with information, please contact the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. The small community began buzzing, with many locals around the lake calling in statements. Most saying heavy snow fell the day before, and no one saw anything unusual. A few mentioned hearing a distant engine sound early in the morning, but couldn't pinpoint the direction. By nightfall, the patrol team returned to headquarters without clear results. In the end-of-day log, Healy wrote briefly, "No signs of foul play, no signs of leaving the area. Need to deploy expanded search." His proposal was approved that night, along with an order to mobilize state rescue forces and the White Mountain National Forest search team. From here, Michael Warren's disappearance was officially classified as an urgent search, kicking off the largest-scale hunt Conway had seen in years. The next morning, snow had stopped, but the thick ice covering Lake Chocorua made every movement slow and laborious. The search force was deployed from a temporary command center set up along Route 16, less than a mile from the lake edge. In addition to Carroll County deputies, the New Hampshire State Police sent a special rescue team with 2 specialized snowmobiles. Many Conway residents volunteered, bringing shovels, flashlights, and waterproof topographic maps. The search area was divided into 3 routes, the first around the western shore, where a trail led straight from the turnout with tire tracks, the second along the northern pine forest edge, rarely visited, and the last extending south along the old abandoned dam. Each group had 4 people, equipped with radios and state-issued infrared thermal detectors. Outdoor temperatures dropped low, around -16 degrees Celsius. Nearly all traces from the previous day had been erased. Search dogs were brought in, sniffing from the tire track spot toward the lake center, but they only went a few dozen meters before stopping, circling on the cold snow and losing the scent completely. The rescue team tried scanning with ground-penetrating radar for large objects like a vehicle, but results were just faint, unidentified signals. At noon, a Border Patrol helicopter was dispatched, circling the lake for aerial photos. The lens captured a wide depression about 3 square meters near the western shore, where the ice was darker and seemed to have refrozen after breaking. Images were sent to command and printed for analysis. Healy and State Rescue Team leader Sergeant Mark Ellison went to the scene. Both probed with steel poles, feeling the ice below was significantly thinner than surrounding areas. Beneath was murky water, impossible to see through. They marked the area with wooden stakes and red tape, designating it the primary suspect point. Throughout the afternoon, groups continued sweeping the lake edges, searching nearby trails for footprints, clothing, or personal items. Nothing. By evening, cold winds rose, temperatures dropped further, forcing the entire search team to withdraw. A quick meeting was held at the command tent. Data from search devices all pointed to the same conclusion. No signs of a survivor leaving the area, no struggle traces, no clear criminal activity. Ellison's interim report stated, high likelihood victim's vehicle plunged into lake when ice cracked. Insufficient conditions to pinpoint sinking location. On the map, spread across the table, Healy circled the ice depression and noted, suspected fall point, need further verification when weather allows. That night, the lake area was temporarily sealed, with lights set up around the command post to mark the safe perimeter. Outside, strong winds whipped snow into a blur, erasing any remaining footprints from the day. In the evening news that day, WMWV updated briefly, authorities are searching for a missing man believed to have had an accident while ice fishing on Lake Chocorua. No trace of the victim has been found yet. That news closed the first search day, leaving behind a frozen lake and an unanswered void. On the morning of the 3rd day since Michael Warren was reported missing, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office transferred on-site command to Sergeant James Easton, experienced in traffic accidents and wilderness disappearances. He arrived at Lake Chocorua with the state forensics team, bringing photography equipment, sampling kits, and ice thickness gauges. The temporary command post by the trail was expanded, turning the lake area into a controlled lockdown zone. Easton ordered panoramic photos of the suspected fall point from multiple angles, recording weather conditions and positions of markers from the previous day. Temperature was around -18 degrees Celsius, with strong winds and limited visibility. Initial photos showed ice in the depression center averaging 15 centimeters thick, significantly thinner than the rest of the lake. While the forensics team measured, Easton directed collecting soil and snow samples around the tire track area, plus checking the sloped bank leading to the water edge to determine vehicle movement direction. Tire tracks were still visible under fresh snow, with width and spacing matching a mid-size SUV. Nearby snow had a deeper depression, like a temporary parking spot. Easton thought the vehicle might have stopped there before sliding farther. Dark soil samples from the ice edge were sealed in nylon bags, numbered and added to evidence. He also ordered water samples from the depression spot, in case of engine oil or fluid leaks. During the survey, a local resident, Richard Mallory, who lived in a small house over half a mile from the lake, approached the investigators. He said that morning of the incident, around after 6 o'clock, while starting a fire, he heard a car engine echoing from the lake direction, followed by a heavy sound like metal hitting something. However, he didn't see vehicle lights and didn't leave home due to heavy snow. The statement was recorded in the report and signed. Easton assessed it, matched Michael's departure time per Denise. He had the area around Mallory's house surveyed, but found no additional traces. By afternoon, forensics completed photos and notes, totaling over 30 images, 8 soil samples, and 3 snow samples. The interim report confirmed no secondary impact signs, no abrupt braking, tire direction indicates continuous slide toward lake. Based on that, Easton proposed deploying a specialized dive team to check the lake bottom within 50 meters of the depression. However, the end-of-day weather forecast predicted a cold front with heavy snow for the next 2 days, postponing the plan. He ordered reinforcing the lockdown with warning stakes and constant guards to prevent public access. As the sun set, ice began thickening again, blurring morning probe marks. Easton stood gazing at the flat lake surface, small waves frozen mid-motion, clearly sensing that if the vehicle was indeed down there, chances of finding it in these conditions were nearly zero. He wrote the day's closing line in the report, "No object or body confirmed, scene stable. Continue awaiting favorable weather for recovery." The case officially entered full scene investigation phase, but initial results were still zero. 2 days later, after weather stabilized temporarily, the New Hampshire State Dive Team was dispatched to the scene per Sergeant James Easton's proposal. It was still bitterly cold, but lake ice had thickened enough for probing drills. 4 professional divers split into 2 groups, with hydraulic drills, safety lines, and handheld sonar. The designated area included the entire suspect depression and western lake bottom, averaging 8 meters deep. Throughout the morning, drill noises and metal-on-ice clangs echoed in the still air. After drilling 6 holes, they lowered underwater cameras. In the gray, murky water, only mud and gravel debris, no metal reflections, no car-like shapes. The tech team checked sonar signals, detecting slight bottom protrusions, but identifying them as submerged rocks. By noon, temperatures plunged, freezing water at drill edges, forcing a break for equipment maintenance. Meanwhile, Easton and forensics continued recording depth and ice thickness data, mapping drill point positions in detail. Morning results showed no large objects in the checked range. Afternoon expanded to 4 more points near the southern shore, where ice was darker. Results unchanged. A wood splinter and small cloth piece were retrieved but unrelated. Near dusk, the team withdrew due to dropping temperatures and rising winds. The preliminary report to the office stated, "No objects matching vehicle size detected. No signs of oil, gas, or artificial materials under ice." Despite no progress, Easton requested one more day for certainty. The next day, divers drilled 11 points over a 100-square-meter area, including near the old dam. All data matched: flat bottom, fine mud, no hard objects. Each drill site was marked with red wooden stakes, and when the final point yielded nothing, Easton noted, "No vehicle detected. No crime evidence." That afternoon, he called a short meeting at the temporary command, attended by rescue, state police reps, and the victim's family. The tech team's official report was read: "Measurements and observations show no impact, explosion, or mechanical damage signs in surveyed area." And observations show no impact, explosion, or mechanical damage signs in surveyed area. No determinable criminal elements at scene. When asked about the victim falling into the lake, the lead diver replied that, with thin ice and weather conditions then, an accident was entirely possible, and body or vehicle could have drifted beyond the survey range. Easton, after consulting forensics, gave a temporary conclusion: ice crack accident while fishing, insufficient evidence for exact time and location. Michael's family, present, reacted weakly. Denise didn't believe her husband would risk driving onto the ice, but had no evidence to counter. Michael's mother demanded continued search, but police said weather didn't allow, and no basis to expand. A week later, the case file was completed. In the conclusion, Easton wrote clearly: "No foul play signs. Victim determined missing in harsh weather. Likely natural factor accident." The file was transferred to state records for temporary storage, status undetermined accident, awaiting further info. As the investigation team left, lake ice had refrozen solid, covering all search traces. Conway returned to northern winter quiet, with only the Warren family still awaiting an explanation no one could provide. By February 2003, after nearly 6 weeks with no further discoveries, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office completed administrative procedures for Michael Warren's disappearance. The file was closed with the official conclusion: accident due to cracking ice while fishing, victim missing, body not recovered. Report number 02-1747 was printed in 3 copies, sent to the county prosecutor's office, the state records management office, and 1 retained at local headquarters. Sergeant James Easton signed under field investigation lead, confirming no further evidence needed exploitation. A short 2-page summary accompanied it, listing key results: no vehicle detected, no signs of crime, no notable physical evidence. No part of the report mentioned mechanical inspection of the vehicle or analysis of ice sliding potential, nor any request to extract data from Michael's cell phone, which had been found at home with a dead battery. At that time, mobile communication devices were not yet widespread and not considered important investigative data sources. The file also did not mention pursuing financial activities. As per regulation, an accident was not classified as having criminal elements. In the final brief meeting of the investigation team, Easton informed the prosecutor's representative, "No indications this was criminal activity. All scene data supports the accident hypothesis." His report was approved without requests for supplementation. Simultaneously, the state rescue team completed its separate summary, confirming searches followed standard winter rescue protocols, and no large objects were found in the lake bottom. All documents, photos, maps, and samples were sealed in a metal box labeled "Closed, Non-Criminal Incident." On February 12, the case box was moved to the basement storage of the county administration building, alongside hundreds of other undetermined accidents from prior years. There, it was just a code in the system: 02-1747, victim name Michael J. Warren, conclusion accident. No one followed up or updated it. Denise received an official notification copy mailed to her. The letter had only 3 paragraphs, thanking the family for cooperation and expressing regret that the body could not be recovered. She folded it and placed it in her husband's desk drawer, where his notebook and the Lake Chocorua map he used to mark with red pen remained. Time passed, winter ended, snow melted, then spring came, and the lake reopened to tourists and fishermen. No one in town mentioned the case except in passing when driving by the road to the lake. where old faded warning stakes still stood. That year, Conway recorded a total of 7 deaths or disappearances due to ice accidents. Michael Warren's name was just one added to the state's statistical list. In the year-end summary report, the case description was condensed to 12 words: missing, suspected accident, victim not found. For the administrative system, the case was considered closed. No one was assigned, no budget for further searches, no more questions asked. Only the Warren family maintained the annual ritual of visiting the lake on Michael's disappearance date, standing by the thawed shore, silently gazing at the cold water where all recorded traces had vanished with time. 7 years later, in the fall of 2010, when New Hampshire launched a program to digitize old records for electronic storage of all cases from the early 1990s, Michael Warren's disappearance file was pulled from storage. A young clerk in the Carroll County Sheriff's Records Office, while scanning photos and reports, noticed the original scene film roll did not match the printed paper copies. The original inventory listed 36 numbered photos, but the film roll contained only 30. The final 6 frames were blank, showing only dark patches and blurred streaks. The clerk noted it and reported to the direct supervisor, the administrative lieutenant in charge of storage, per periodic audit protocol. The matter was then forwarded to the County Forensics Technical Unit for cause verification. A technical report issued 2 weeks later stated the film was overexposed or the camera back opened before development, causing the end portion to fail to record. The error timing could not be determined, and since the case was concluded as non-criminal accident, no personnel accountability investigation was conducted. However, while reviewing the 2002 scene personnel list, storage discovered the photographer was Deputy Brian Easton, son of Sergeant James Easton, the original investigation commander. In the December 24, 2002 shift log, Brian was listed as technical support staff, responsible for photography and sample transport. When contacted for confirmation, Brian, now transferred to administrative duties, replied briefly that the film might have malfunctioned due to low temperatures during outdoor operations. He also said he no longer remembered details, as everything happened in blizzard conditions and rushed before the holiday break. The internal report recorded this explanation and closed the audit item with the conclusion technical error, no impact on investigation results. Nevertheless, per new state regulations, all storage anomalies required supplemental notes. On November 12, 2010, a note was added to the last page of electronic file 02-1747. 6 scene photos missing, cause determined film development error. Responsible, Deputy Brian Easton. No further investigation required. The entire file was rescanned and stored in the central data system at Concord, including rephotographed images of intact film frames. This discovery drew no internal attention, as dozens of old cases had similar errors during digital conversion. However, the difference was that Michael Warren's case had initial accident on lake suspicions, so missing scene photos somewhat complicated future verification. A printed copy of the note was clipped to the original file, inside the yellowed paper cover. No further checks were made, no orders to re-examine. From then on, File 02-1747 remained in the closed, non-criminal incidents category, occasionally opened only for periodic administrative statistics. On the inner cover, James Easton's signature remained clear, next to the 2010 black ink supplemental note. 6 photos missing, technical error, no effect on conclusion. That was the last time the file was touched for nearly another decade, and the only evidence the storage system had overlooked a minor error sufficient to create a faint gap in what seemed a sealed picture of Michael Warren's disappearance. In April 2021, nearly 2 decades after Michael Warren's disappearance was forgotten, Lake Chocorua entered spring with unusually low water levels due to prolonged drought. The state dam maintenance company conducted routine inspections of the downstream area and adjusted drainage gates to prevent bank cracking. While clearing accumulated mud and debris at the western dam section, a work crew discovered a large metal frame protruding from mud about 2 meters deep. Initially, they thought it was the frame of an old boat or abandoned snowmobile, but when a shiny metal patch glinted in the sunlight, The crew leader ordered work halted and notified local police. The Carroll County Patrol team arrived that afternoon. As water receded another few dozen centimeters, an SUV's shape became clear, front end downward, body thickly mud-covered, windows shattered, front axle misaligned. The rear license plate, though faded, still readable with ending digits 642, matching the registration in Michael Warren's 2002 missing vehicle file. The shift officer immediately sealed the area and called the state criminal investigation team to take over the scene. The next day, recovery began. A small crane was erected at the dam bank, with cable systems hooked to the frame. Pulling was slow and careful, as bottom mud had gripped the vehicle for nearly 20 years. When lifted from the water, a strong mud and metal smell rose. The entire lower body was nearly rotted, but the main structure remained intact. Left front door closed tight, rear door off hinges. The forensics team immediately photographed, recorded positions, and transported the vehicle to the state inspection yard in Tamworth, 10 miles away. During preliminary examination, they discovered mostly intact skeletal remains in the driver's compartment, seated in the driver's seat, seatbelt unfastened, thick jacket, leather boots and arm bone frame still in shape. In the glove box, a mud-caked black leather wallet containing an intact ID card and a small photo of Michael and his wife. On the left hand of the remains was a gold ring engraved, DMW, 1998. Additionally, in the back seat, forensics recovered a Browning semi-automatic shotgun, 12-gauge long barrel, heavily rusted but with intact serial number. All evidence was sealed, coded, and entered into forensic storage. The initial report to Carroll County headquarters confirmed license plate, personal items, and physical characteristics fully matched data from missing person case Michael J. Warren. News of the discovery spread quickly internally, and within 2 days, local media ran short articles. Vehicle believed to belong to man missing since 2002 found in Lake Chocorua bottom. The state sheriff's office requested detailed information be withheld until official identification. When bone samples were sent to the New Hampshire Forensics Lab in Concord, preliminary DNA tests comparing with Michael's mother's 2003 archive sample, this confirmed the person in the vehicle was Michael Warren, missing for nearly 20 years. At Carroll County Sheriff's Headquarters, Storage File 02, Files 1747, was reopened for the first time since 2003. The yellowed paper stacks, worn hardcovers, and faded photos were placed on the examination table. A new note was added to the file cover. Reopened, Cold Case Review, April 2021. Discovering the vehicle in the lake was not just closure to Michael's whereabouts, but opened a new chain of legal procedures. Per state rules, any case with remains found more than 10 years after, declared missing, must be re-examined by the Special Investigation Unit. An internal bulletin sent late April stated, Cold Case #02-1747, Subject Warren, Michael J. Vehicle, and remains located, require re-evaluation of cause of death and circumstances. The case was officially reactivated after 19 years in storage, marking the return of a name the town of Conway thought had been forgotten with the ice on Lake Chocorua. On May 3, 2021, after State Forensics Lab DNA results were released, the New Hampshire State Police Chief's Office officially transferred the case to the Cold Case Unit under the State Department of Justice. Lieutenant Claire Donnelly, 42, who had solved 2 missing persons cases in the Winnipesaukee Lake region, was appointed lead investigator. In the appointment report, she was tasked with reviewing all original documents, determining cause of death, and assessing potential criminal elements. On her first day at Carroll County headquarters, Donnelly was led to the basement storage, where File 02-1747 had sat untouched for nearly 20 years. The old file, dark brown cover, was sealed with silver tape and marked reopened, April 2021. She opened it, flipping through carbon-typed reports, faded but readable familiar phrases, accident due to cracking ice, no signs of crime. However, in the initial review, Donnelly noticed anomalies. The scene appendix noted 36 photos taken, but attached prints were only 30. The 6 missing were marked content unknown. Notably, the evidence list had duplicate numbering. The tire tracks near bank edge item appeared twice, with different coordinates. At the bottom of the report was Sergeant James Easton's signature, but no forensic staff confirmation signature, a requirement since 2001. Donnelly noted all these in her notebook, then requested the technical unit extract the full electronic scan for comparison. While reviewing the 2010 supplemental note, she focused on 6 photos missing, technical error, no effect on conclusion. Next to it, the photographer, Deputy Brian Easton. She paused there. In the attached personnel chart, Brian was listed as support technician, first participation. Donnelly asked the archivist about his relation to the scene commander was confirmed. Yes, son of Sergeant James Easton. Subsequent notes showed no internal investigation opened after the 2010 discovery. All classified non-serious error. This made Donnelly uneasy. In other cold cases she handled, such errors often ignited new investigative directions. She decided to compile a list of documents to recollect 2021 forensics report, 2002 scene data, tire track position maps, and personnel files of both Eastons. That afternoon, she visited the state forensics lab to meet Dr. Harold Klein, the direct examiner of the remains. DNA results confirmed. Bone samples, 99.97% match with Michael's mother's 2003 archived sample. But what caught Klein's attention was the body's condition. He pointed to skull photos and described small crack in left temporal area, parallel fracture lines, unlike water impact injury, likely occurred before submersion. Additionally, lungs retained less mud than typical drowning cases. Cannot conclusively determine drowning as cause of death, Klein said. Need further chemical tests to rule out other factors. Donnelly quickly noted every detail. That evening at Conway headquarters, she held a brief meeting with local forensics, presenting initial findings, missing scene photos, duplicate reports, and examination results not fully matching the 2003 accident conclusion. After the meeting, she sent a report to superiors recommending case reclassification. On May 7th, an official document was issued from the State Police Chief's office, per Lieutenant Claire Donnelly's recommendation, Case #02-1747, reclassified from accident to suspicious death with potential criminal elements. A short internal memo was sent the same day, requiring all files, evidence, and related images be transferred to the cold case unit. The Michael Warren case, thought to be just a 2002 lake ice accident, was now officially a criminal investigation without answers. After 19 years of silence, in the first week after the case was reclassified, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly spent most of her time in the old conference room at Conway headquarters, where she reconstructed the entire crime scene diagram based on the original documents. The room's walls were covered with large format prints of topographic maps, 2002 crime scene photos, recent satellite images, and survey data from the 2021 salvage team. She placed the maps side by side, overlaying data layers with red pins, the vehicle discovery location, the access road to the lake, the ice depression area, and the tire tracks noted in the old reports. This arrangement allowed her to see the full context of the incident, something the 2002 investigators likely never did. In the initial report, police determined the vehicle's slide direction was from the eastern trail straight down to the lake surface, then sinking in the depression near the dam. But when cross-referencing with the actual terrain, Donnelly found it unreasonable. The dirt road from the forest edge to the lake had a slight northward slope, and if an SUV slid down due to loss of traction, the natural trajectory would veer in that direction, not straight to the dam in the southwest. She requested a technician to simulate on a 3D topographic map, inputting data on slope, surface friction, and wind direction on December 22, 2002. The simulation results showed that for the vehicle to fall exactly at the discovered point, the driver would have had to actively steer left by nearly 40 degrees before the ice cracked. Intentional behavior, not an uncontrolled slide reaction. Donnelly noted the results in an internal report, marking with red pen the line, slide direction inconsistent with natural conditions, possible intervention. She felt the need to re-examine every small detail in the old files, even those that seemed meaningless. While reviewing the sealed evidence catalog from 2003, she discovered Box 12A, front tire soil sample, had never been examined. In the file, the entry was crossed out in blue pen, noted hold for comparison, not sent to lab. The reason was not specified. She requested unsealing under the supervision of a state forensic technician. Inside was a small plastic bag containing dried, hardened dark brown soil with a faded label front L, December 2, 23. Under magnification, she observed the soil contained many gravel fragments and fine sand, unlike the lake area's mud sediment. According to the geological map, the eastern shore of Lake Chocorua was mostly gray fine sandy mud, while this sample had a reddish-brown tone and coarse quartz grains, characteristic of the land along the Bearcamp River, nearly 10 miles from the lake. She noted, sample incompatible with scene stratigraphy, need to verify origin. That same afternoon, Donnelly sent the sample to the Geological Analysis Lab at the University of New Hampshire for composition examination and standard sample comparison. In the accompanying request, she specified the purpose determined possibility that soil sample was collected from an area other than the Lake Chocorua scene. While awaiting results, she continued reviewing the old dive team notes from 2002. One detail stood out in the scene description. There was the line "Lake mud disturbed." Many strange organic impurities. However, no water or mud samples were retained, except for the tire soil she had just discovered. Donnelly returned to the old evidence storage again, this time with a criminal technician. As they cleared the boxes, she noticed many sealed bags stained with mud and hastily handwritten, indicating sloppy collection at the time. In another bag labeled "Rear View Mirror Position Unclear," she found a small glass fragment with clean-cut edges. No rust scratches, possibly from light impact before the vehicle sank. If it was impact during the fall, there should be cracks, she said quietly. But here the glass was detached beforehand. The technician nodded, adding to the supplemental report. 3 days later, Donnelly received an email from the geology lab. The report confirmed the soil in bag 12A did not match Lake Chocorua sediment. The sample's mineral composition, especially high ratios of hematite and feldspar, matched soil from the gravel area along the Bearcamp River, west of Tamworth. The report concluded, high probability the soil does not belong to the Lake Chocorua area, but adhered to the tire elsewhere before the vehicle sank. After reading, Donnelly leaned back in her chair, thinking for a long time. This meant Michael's vehicle might have been at another location, far from the lake, before appearing at the scene. She added a short line in her investigation log, "Cannot view this as a natural accident. Vehicle may have been moved or pushed into the lake after the occupant was no longer able to control it." That evening, she returned to Lake Chocorua with the technical team. The May wind blew cold from the forest, the water surface calm, only old crane mud marks from the previous month. She looked around the shore, trying to envision the 2002 scene, a man, a vehicle, a frozen lake, and a hasty conclusion. As she returned to the car, she said quietly to her colleague, "If someone did bring the vehicle here, then we never really understood what happened that winter." Back at headquarters, Donnelly completed an 11-page report affirming unnatural slide direction, soil not from the same origin, evidence collection showing signs of oversight. At the end of the report, she handwritten a single line, "Request expanded investigation, possible scene manipulation," and from there, the Michael Warren missing person case officially entered a new phase where every old detail was re-examined with suspicion and science. The geological report sent from the University of New Hampshire not only confirmed the soil and evidence bag 12A was completely different from Lake Chocorua sediment, but also pinpointed the highest matching location, a riverside area along the Bearcamp, about 11 miles west of the lake, near Pine Ridge Road, where a person who appeared in the 2002 file resided, Brian Easton. Upon reading that conclusion, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly paused for a long time at the final line. Soil sample match rate 96%, characteristic of Bearcamp River area stratigraphy. She reopened the residence map and saw Brian's house right on the route connecting Conway and Tamworth, the road Michael Warren might have taken on the morning he disappeared. The next day, she presented the results to the cold case team and requested re-examination of all remaining evidence, especially the victim's vehicle. The car was still in the state forensic storage, sealed after salvage. The criminal technical team was ordered to scan surface traces with new technology using multi-layer spectral light, allowing detection of faded or oxidized old fingerprints. After 3 days, the results were sent back. The report stated that on the left front door edge, the driver's door, 2 faint fingerprints were preserved, overlapping. The first matched Michael Warren's sample. The second, though not fully clear, partially matched Brian Easton's fingerprint sample, stored in the state police personnel file. Compatibility rate was 82%, sufficient to identify possible same source. Donnelly requested recomparison using independent FBI software. The second result gave the same number, 82.4%. Not enough to convict, the technician said, but enough to ask, why is Brian's fingerprint on the victim's car? Donnelly pondered. In the 2002 file, there was no record of Brian contacting the vehicle, even though he was the scene photographer. Per procedure, technical staff were not to touch evidence before the examination team arrived. She retrieved the duty roster for that day. Brian's name was listed in the photography support group, no evidence handling duties. However, there was no signature from him on the handover log, making Claire even more suspicious. If he wasn't allowed to touch the car, she said in the internal meeting, then why is his fingerprint there? Meanwhile, the State Electronic Forensics Department restored data from Michael's mobile phone, found at home and never analyzed before. Though the device was very old, they could extract the call logs stored in the SIM card. The results stunned the entire team on the morning of December 22, 2002, the day Michael disappeared. There were 2 final calls made at 6:47 and 7:12 a.m. Both to the same number, 603-447-0914. Registered to Brian Easton, then a reserve police officer. Call durations were 58 seconds and 2 minutes 14 seconds. After the second call, no further activity on Michael's phone. Donnelly requested verification of cell tower locations at that time. The carrier's historical data, though mostly deleted, still had backups on the central server. The extract showed Michael's phone connected to the tower in the Tamworth area, meaning he was near Bearcamp River when calling, not in Conway as initially assumed. This perfectly matched the soil analysis results. She underlined in her notebook, final call location, near Brian Easton's home. When piecing it together, the picture became clearer. That morning, Michael left home early intending to go fishing, but in reality, he contacted Brian twice, possibly to meet. Michael's tires carried soil from the Bearcamp area, then somehow the vehicle appeared on Lake Chocorua, over 10 miles away, and sank under the ice. Both the geographical trajectory and timeline did not align with the accident hypothesis. If the two met, Donnelly said to the team in the afternoon meeting, then what happened afterward? She re-scanned all of Brian's statements in the 2002 file. He claimed he was on duty at the police station that morning, never leaving. However, the duty log only recorded presence from 8:30 a.m. No evidence he was there earlier. A nearly 2-hour gap, exactly during Michael's disappearance. Donnelly sent an official request to the State Personnel Office to re-verify Brian's work records for December 22, 2002, while ordering resealing of all related evidence, including the car, hunting rifle, and original soil sample. In the report submitted at the end of May, Claire clearly noted 3 key findings. 1, tire soil matched the area near Brian Easton's residence. 2, faint fingerprint partially matched Brian's record. 3, phone log showed Michael contacted Brian twice on the disappearance morning. Her preliminary conclusion was written in clear handwriting, high probability the two met before the victim disappeared. Does not rule out criminal elements in scene concealment. As she closed the thick file and looked out the headquarters window, Conway's sky had turned to early summer rain. The rain fell silently on the nearby lake, where for 19 years the truth had lain still under the cold ice, waiting for someone like her to revisit every detail. Mid-June 2021, after nearly a month of reviewing and gathering evidence, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly officially summoned Brian Easton to the Cold Case Unit's interrogation room in Concord. The reason on the summons: provide information related to the Michael J. Warren case. Upon entering, Brian, now 44, graying hair, sturdy build, maintained composure, arms crossed, introducing himself as a former scene support police officer and saying he would cooperate as necessary. Claire sat opposite, placing the thick file on the metal table. She started with simple questions about his role in the 2002 investigation, scene photography, and evidence handling procedures. Brian answered fluently, sometimes adding details to show experience. That day the ice was thin, strong wind. I was only there 2 hours, then back to the station. Everything seemed smooth, until Claire asked, "Did you meet Michael Warren that morning?" Brian paused slightly, then shook his head. "No, I only heard about the disappearance when starting my shift. We knew each other, but not close enough to meet." The answer was firm, eyes unblinking. Claire opened her laptop, turning the screen toward him. On it was the mobile tower location map, showing 2 signals connecting to the same tower in the Bear Camp River area at 7:12 a.m. on December 22, 2002, one from Michael's phone, one from Brian's personal mobile. "This is carrier data," she said slowly. "Both phones on the same tower, within a 1-mile radius. Any explanation?" For the first time, Brian's expression changed. He frowned, staring at the screen, then replied, "The tower might have wide coverage. I was home, just a few miles from the river. Signal overlap is normal." Claire nodded lightly, but continued, "Do you remember talking to Michael on the phone that morning?" "No, I didn't get any calls from him." She said nothing, just pulled out the detailed call log, pointing to the 2 lines with clear phone numbers, times, and durations. 2 consecutive calls, 6:47 and 7:12 a.m., both connected. Brian fell silent. After a few seconds, he leaned forward, voice lower. "If there were, it must have been a wrong number. I don't remember." Claire observed the reaction, then opened another file. Photos of the faint fingerprints on the car door. "We found your fingerprint on the driver's door. How do you explain?" Brian let out a dry laugh. "I photographed the scene. Of course I might have touched the car. Everyone wore gloves that year, but I didn't." The answer sounded reasonable, but in the 2002 file, he was not assigned to handle evidence. Claire closed the file, speaking slowly. "Per regulations, photographers do not touch the vehicle. And your duty log that day has a 2-hour gap, right when Michael disappeared. I need you to confirm where you were." At this point, the room's atmosphere grew heavy. Brian leaned back, arms crossed. "I have nothing more to say," he replied, voice stiff. Claire said nothing more, just pressed the record button and stated, "You have the right to remain silent, but we will continue the investigation." After a few minutes of silence, Brian looked down at the table, then suddenly said, "I think I should have a lawyer." That statement ended the first interrogation. He was allowed to leave, but under 2 officers' surveillance. That same afternoon, Claire sent a summary report to the state prosecutor's office, requesting a search warrant for Brian Easton's home in Tamworth, based on related evidence, matching soil area, faint fingerprint, and phone data. The warrant was approved after just 36 hours. On the morning of June 18th, the investigation team coordinated with New Hampshire State Police to execute the search. Brian's 2-story wooden house was isolated at the end of Pine Ridge Road, surrounded by old oaks and an old shed in the back. In the garage, they found many technical items, old film boxes, developing chemicals, metal stands, all dusty. On the top shelf, technicians seized a silver Pentax K1000 camera, 35mm film type, along with an undeveloped roll. Per archived records, this was the exact model used to photograph the 2002 disappearance scene. When Claire picked up the camera, She noticed the back cover slightly cracked, sign of hasty opening. Next to it was faintly engraved, B.E. Brian Easton's initials. "We'll take it for examination," Claire said, noting in the report. Brian, standing at the door, silent, eyes cold as forensic staff, placed the camera in a sealed bag. In the living room, they also seized memory cards, old hard drives, and a paper box containing black and white film-developed photos, mostly lake and forest landscapes. But at the bottom of the stack were 6 blank frames, the negatives neatly cut. As the evidence transport vehicle left Tamworth, Claire stood by the roadside, looking at the Bearcamp River flowing quietly in the distance. In her mind, the pieces began fitting: soil, calls, fingerprint, and now the old camera, along with 6 blank frames, exactly matching the number missing from the 2010 file. She knew the case was no longer a technical coincidence, as many had said. It was the sign of a secret hidden for 19 years, and the person behind the lens that year might also be the one who knew exactly what happened to Michael Warren on the frigid morning of December 2002. The 35mm film roll recovered from Brian Easton's Pentax was sealed and sent immediately to the Image Analysis Lab at the New Hampshire Department of Justice. The old film restoration specialists worked continuously for 2 days to clean oxidized chemicals and recover usable frames. Of the 24 frames, the first 18 were overexposed, possibly from opening the camera before developing. The last 6, though blurry and scratched, retained clear images. When the first digital scan appeared on the screen, both Claire Donnelly and the technical team fell silent. Photos of lakeside landscapes, lightly cracked ice, overcast sky, gray light typical of December. In the 4th frame, a dark SUV clearly in the left corner, the exact 2000 Honda CR-V model of Michael Warren, identifiable by the round reflective sticker on the rear window. The rear door was slightly open, no one inside. But what made everyone stop was the final photo in the roll. It was taken from a low angle, apparently from a dirt slope looking down to the lake edge. Michael's vehicle still on the shore, front pointing toward the uncracked ice. Behind the vehicle, in the pale light, 2 male figures stood close. One in a light-colored jacket, tall and thin, wearing a knit hat, similar to Michael's description in the file. The other in dark clothing, shorter, back to the camera. That silhouette, though face unclear, Claire recognized immediately, the stiff posture and broad shoulders, identical to Brian Easton's build. The recovered data on the film edge showed the date and time automatically printed by the camera's mechanical clock. The 22nd of December 2002, 9:27 a.m. Claire read the line aloud, then looked at the technician. "Are you sure this time is accurate?" "Yes," the technician replied. "Pentax models from that era have a maximum 5-minute error, couldn't be off by nearly 2 hours. Michael's official missing report was recorded at 7:45 a.m. that day. This meant the photo was taken nearly 2 hours after the victim was reported missing." Claire requested enlarged prints of the final frame, contrast processing to clarify details. Under analysis lens, the image showed more: the ice in front of the vehicle intact, no cracks or holes, completely contradicting the 2002 report claiming the vehicle plunged into the lake due to weak ice. Next to the vehicle appeared a small reflective object, looking like another camera lens, on a tripod. She requested pixel check, confirming it was indeed photography equipment, aimed straight at the scene. The image analysis report was completed the next afternoon, 12 pages long. The conclusion stated, frame 24 records the victim's vehicle still on shore. No signs of ice breakage or subsidence at the time of capture. Photo taken after the victim was reported missing. Presence of at least 2 men at the scene. Below was bold text. High probability the 2002 scene was staged. Claire held the photo printout, silent for a long while. She recalled Brian's interrogation, the calm demeanor, smooth answers, and immediate reaction upon hearing about the phone data. Everything now had an explanation. He was at the scene after Michael was reported missing, and he took that photo. But for what purpose? To conceal? To document? or to threaten someone. She decided to seal the entire film roll in evidence and transfer copies to the state prosecutor's office. In the report, she noted clearly, photo taken 9:27 a.m. on December 22, 2002. Scene shows no cracks. Two figures present, consistent with staged accident hypothesis. The next day, the criminal technical team continued examining the Pentax camera and discovered fingerprints and human skin DNA inside the body, mostly matching Brian. Additionally, in the film canister seized from his home, there were two other partially developed rolls, containing images of Lake Chocorua from various angles, mostly shots of the ice surface and tire tracks. Some frames were hand-numbered on the film edge, labeled B222A and B222B. Apparently part of the same set as the recovered roll. When the report was submitted, Claire presented it to the state interagency investigation team. On the large screen, she projected the enlarged final photo. Cold light fell across everyone's faces in the meeting room. This, she said, is the last image in the film roll seized from Brian Easton's home. Time taken after the victim was reported missing. Scene intact. Two people present. This proves the accident did not occur as reported in 2002. The vehicle could not have slid into the lake on its own. Someone pushed it in afterwards. The nautical could not have slid into the lake on its own. Someone pushed it in afterward. The room fell silent. Finally, a state officer said quietly, "So, if this photo is real, the entire initial scene was fake." Claire nodded. "Not just fake," she replied, "but deliberately staged, and the photographer, Brian Easton, was the only one in a position to do it." The comprehensive report was completed at the end of June with a concise conclusion based on photographic evidence, phone data, and geological results. There is grounds to determine that the Michael J. Warren scene was interfered with and staged after the victim disappeared. Person most likely responsible, Brian Easton. The final photo, with two figures standing silently beside the unsunken vehicle, became the most critical evidence in the reopened file, and the end of the ice accident hypothesis that had persisted for nearly 20 years. After the photographic evidence report was approved, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly shifted the investigation toward possible financial motive, a link often overlooked in cold case files. She started with old administrative documents from 2003, which clearly stated that Denise Warren, Michael's wife, was the sole beneficiary of a $1.75 million life insurance policy. The policy was signed on November 18, 2001, just over a year before Michael's disappearance, and the broker handling the sale was a familiar name, Brian Easton. This detail made Claire pause for a long time. In the 2002 file, there was no mention of Brian's role as an insurance broker. At that time, he was only listed as forensic technical assistant. She immediately sent a request to Granite Life Insurance, the issuing company, asking for original file copies and payout documents. When the materials arrived, a complex connection gradually emerged. According to the records, Michael's life insurance policy was signed at Granite Life's temporary office in Tamworth, with Brian Easton as the direct consultant. In the occupation declaration, Michael listed appraiser stable income, and the sole beneficiary was his wife Denise. Notably, an extended clause allowed full payout in cases of death by undetermined accident or disappearance over 12 months, with no body found. This clause enabled Denise to receive the full amount in April 2003, just 4 months after the case was classified as an accident. Claire carefully reviewed the bank statements included in the file. On April 7, 2003, Granite Life transferred $1,750,000 USD to Denise Warren's account at North Conway Savings Bank. 6 weeks later, on May 22, 2003, a $120,000 USD transfer was made to an account under B. Easton at the same bank, Tamworth branch. The only note, financial consulting fee. No invoice or side contract was attached. Claire contacted the bank for verification. The records department confirmed the transaction existed and had been reported valid as it did not exceed money laundering thresholds at the time. However, in the customer notes, a handwritten entry by the teller read, "Customer said this was a thank you payment for assistance with insurance procedures." This prompted Claire to request the IRS to review Brian's 2003 tax return. The return did not declare the $120,000 USD. Thus, Brian was not only the insurance broker, but also received a large sum from the beneficiary immediately after the case closed. She realized this could be the real motive, not just covering up an accident, but a sophisticated financial scheme. She wrote in the report, "Total insurance value of $1.75 million paid unusually just 4 months after the victim was declared missing." Broker was Brian Easton, who later received $120,000 from the beneficiary. No legal service contract, signs of financial collusion. To strengthen the case, Claire visited the former Granite Life office, now merged with a larger company in Manchester. In the microfilm archive, she found a copy of the broker contract, signed by Brian, with the title Temporary Consultant, proving he legally worked for the company at the time of signing. However, his professional license had expired in March 2002, 9 months before Michael's disappearance, meaning, at that time, Brian was no longer authorized to broker insurance. Claire presented this finding in the cold case unit's internal meeting. "We have 3 linked elements," she said evenly. 1. Brian sold the insurance policy to Michael. 2. Denise received the full amount just months after the incident. 3. Brian received an undeclared large transfer. Combined with evidence of a staged scene, this is the clearest financial motive. A financial officer asked, "Could the money be a legitimate commission?" Claire shook her head. "No, valid commissions were paid directly by Granite Life, not through the beneficiary. I checked, and Brian only received $4,500 in standard commission. The remaining $120,000 has no legal basis." She concluded the report with bold text, "Grounds to determine financial motive between Brian Easton and Denise Warren, possibly related to staging and concealing Michael Warren's cause of death." By the end of July, when the case summary was sent to the state prosecutor's office, the financial evidence officially became the 4th pillar in the file: life insurance, irregular transfer, shared benefit. For Claire, the case was no longer about an accident or technical error, but a web connecting money, deception, and silence, lasting 19 years. Faced with financial and photographic evidence, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly decided to request a comprehensive mechanical forensic examination of Michael Warren's Honda CR-V, the central piece of evidence in the entire case. The vehicle had been salvaged and stored in state forensic storage since April, but previously only surface checked. This time, she brought in 2 independent experts from the New England Institute of Transportation Mechanics, engineer Raymond Keller, specializing in collision dynamics, and Dr. Eleanor Briggs, an expert in mechanical systems in cold water environments. The examination lasted 3 days in a temperature-controlled workshop. When the vehicle was lifted from its support frame, dried mud fell away, fully exposing the undercarriage and drivetrain. Keller began with the front axle, where the old report noted misalignment due to impact upon falling through ice. But through measurements, he found the axle deflection angle inconsistent with natural fall direction. If the vehicle plunged by gravity, the axle misalignment would be symmetrical, but here only the right wheel was bent inward, while the left was nearly intact. "This is a classic sign of lateral external force," he explained. "As if another object or vehicle pushed this car sideways." Briggs continued with the engine system. Upon removing the spark plug covers, she found no burn marks or characteristic moisture from an engine running when submerged. The combustion chamber was dry, the exhaust clean, and no frozen air bubbles inside. If the engine was running, water would flood through the exhaust, leaving salt deposits, she said. But there's nothing here. The engine was off when the vehicle entered the water. This completely contradicted the 2002 hypothesis that Michael lost control while driving. Claire quickly noted each result. She felt the picture becoming clearer. The vehicle did not plunge into the lake by accident, but was pushed in while off. When Keller removed the left door panel, he discovered hook-shaped scratches on the lock edge, deep into the paint, indicating it had been pried with a thin metal tool, possibly a pry bar or flathead screwdriver. This door wasn't opened with a key, he stated firmly. Someone pried it from outside after it was locked. Simultaneously, the technical team checked the odometer, which had frozen when the electrical system stopped. It read 88,432 miles, while Michael's last maintenance log at his garage, just 2 weeks before disappearance, recorded 88,425, meaning the vehicle had only traveled exactly 7 miles since the last service. Claire pulled out the map for comparison. The distance from Michael's home in Conway to the area near Brian's house in Tamworth was 7 miles. The comprehensive technical report was completed on August 5, 2021. Conclusion: vehicle not in operation when submerged. Engine off, transmission in, driver's seatbelt unused. Body damage indicates lateral external force, possibly by another vehicle or mechanical pusher. Driver's door shows metal pry marks, consistent with unauthorized entry. The final line was underlined in red, insufficient basis to determine natural accident. Claire presented these results in a special cold case unit meeting. On the projection screen, she displayed diagrams comparing vehicle direction, axle positions, and travel map. Based on this data, she said, Michael's vehicle could only have been pushed into the lake while off and unoccupied. An officer asked, "Does the submersion time match any other data?" Claire nodded, projecting the timeline. According to the salvage report's physics simulation, submersion occurred between 7:10 and 7:20 a.m., exactly matching the time frame of the 2 final calls between Michael and Brian. The meeting room went dead silent. She continued, "This means while the two were on the phone, the vehicle was in the Bear Camp area, just minutes before being moved to Lake Chocorua. Cannot rule out the final call being when Michael was lured or coerced." Keller added one detail that silenced everyone in the passenger side glove compartment. He found a circular metal scratch the size of a gun butt. This mark matches someone placing a heavy object there, possibly the shotgun recovered later. Claire recalled the evidence report. A 12-gauge Browning, found in the back seat, safety still on. If the gun was there from the start, Michael wouldn't have put it in the back seat. He always kept it in the trunk when traveling, she said. Someone rearranged the scene before submersion. When the report was finalized, Claire signed with a note, based on mechanical examination results, sufficient signs of external tampering. Engine off, door pried. Submersion timeframe matches victim Brian Easton contact. That night, she sat alone in her office, looking at the large printed photo, the vehicle lying still under the lake like a cold black mass. All the technical pieces now connected, the calls, fingerprint, tire soil, and now the collision mechanics. Every piece of evidence pointed the same way. No doubt remained. Michael Warren did not die in an accident. His vehicle was pushed into the lake, deliberately calculated, and during the exact window when the last person to speak with him was Brian Easton. On August 10, 2021, after receiving full mechanical examination results, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly and the state prosecutor's representative decided to summon Brian Easton for a second time. This was no longer an information session, but a formal confrontation. On the table, Claire laid out each photo, diagram, examination result, and the final image from the Pentax film roll, Michael's vehicle still on shore, 2 figures standing beside it. When Brian entered the interrogation room, he looked visibly aged, eyes weary, hands trembling slightly. Claire began, "We have new results. The vehicle did not plunge into the lake by accident. It was pushed, and the engine was off when it sank. Do you have anything to say before I read the record?" Brian sat silently, glancing at the file, then said softly, "I want to know, if I talk, where will this end?" Claire replied directly, "It will be recorded and submitted to the state prosecutor. But this is your only chance to tell the truth before charges are filed." About 5 minutes of silence passed. Brian bowed his head, sighed, then began speaking in a hoarse, halting voice. Yes, I was there. That morning Michael called me. He said he wanted to talk privately about Denise. Claire took careful notes, without interrupting. Brian continued. I knew she had filed to liquidate the insurance policy early, and Michael was getting suspicious. He said he would report it to the company, which could cost me my job. I told him not to, that it was all a misunderstanding. But he wouldn't listen. According to Brian, they agreed to meet in a clearing near the Bear Camp River just after 6 a.m. Michael arrived first, driving the green CRV. He was furious. I tried to explain that Denise bought the insurance on her own, and I only handled the paperwork. But then he said I was splitting the money, that Denise and I had been lying to him the whole time. Everything spiraled out of control. Brian said the argument happened beside the vehicle, while he tried to keep Michael from driving away. He pushed me first. I lost it. Pushed back too hard. Michael slipped, fell backward, his head hitting the edge of the car door. He paused, voice dropping. I thought he was just unconscious. But when I tried to wake him, no response. Claire asked, "Did you call emergency services?" No, I panicked. I knew if I called the police, they'd think I did it on purpose. I lost control, and I was afraid my father would be disgraced. He was still Carroll County Sheriff then. According to the statement, after a few minutes of panic, Brian dragged Michael's body into the vehicle, placed it in the driver's seat, then drove the CRV toward Lake Chocorua. I remember it clearly. Gray sky, thick fog, and the road slick as oil. I planned to leave the car there and report it as an accident, but I couldn't bring myself to. I turned off the engine, engaged the parking brake, then pushed. The car slid slowly, then the ice cracked and it sank. Everything disappeared faster than I expected. Claire looked straight at him. "And you took photos?" Brian nodded, eyes red. "I had the Pentax with me. I don't know why I took them. Maybe to remember what I had done, that I could never go back." Claire showed him the final photo, then asked, "The person in the photo standing next to you, who is it?" Brian swallowed hard, silent for a long time, then said, "My father." The room went dead still. He continued, voice almost a whisper. "That night I went home and told him everything. He said he'd handle it, that if the truth came out, both his career and our family would be ruined. He went to the scene the next day, ordered the patrol team to seal off the east side, and he and I cleaned the west shore. The 6 damaged frames weren't technical errors. He told me to cut the end of the roll, and he personally rewrote the report, moving the scene discovery time back by 2 hours. Claire held her breath, recording every word. "So he knew you pushed the car into the lake?" "He knew. He said, 'We'll treat this as an accident. Everyone will believe it. Just stay quiet.' And I did." Brian recounted that in the years that followed, his father had instructed him never to mention it again. When the digitization program discovered missing photos in 2010, his father had signed off on film development error to bury it forever. He told me to shut up, because he still had his honor, and I had nothing to lose. When Claire asked why he never turned himself in, Brian simply replied, "I thought I could live with it, until you came looking for me." When you mentioned the soil sample, I knew it was time. He dropped his head, hands clasped, and trembling. The interrogation lasted over 4 hours. The entire confession was recorded on audio and video, with a notary attorney present as witness. At the end of the report, Brian signed to confirm, "I, Brian Easton, admit to being present at the scene on December 22, 2002, to pushing Michael Warren's vehicle into Lake Chocorua after the victim died from impact. I acted in a state of panic and under the direction of my father, former Sheriff James Easton." That evening, Claire sent the transcript along with the full file to the New Hampshire State Prosecutor's Office. The report concluded with a single brief and cold note, "Confession verified, elements of criminal concealment involving law enforcement personnel." On the morning of August 13, 2021, after receiving Brian Easton's fully signed confession and supporting evidence, including mechanical examination results, financial data, and recovered scene photos. New Hampshire State Prosecutor Elizabeth Hanley approved emergency arrest warrants for Brian Easton on charges of second-degree manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and concealment of criminal activity. Simultaneously, the prosecutor's office requested investigative detention for Denise Warren, the victim's wife, on charges of insurance fraud and complicity in evidence concealment. Both warrants were delivered that morning to the federal task force in coordination with the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. At 8:45 a.m., unmarked vehicles left the cold case unit headquarters in Concord, heading toward Conway. Claire Donnelly rode in the command vehicle, face stoic, holding copies of the arrest warrants. Light rain blurred the road into town, where she knew, in just a few hours, secrets buried for nearly 2 decades would be officially exposed. The execution site was a wooden house on the outskirts of Conway, where Brian had been renting since leaving the police force. When the task force arrived, he was in the backyard, repairing a small boat. They surrounded the area in silence. Claire stepped forward first, identified herself, and read the warrant aloud. Brian Easton, you are under arrest under sections 632 and 641, 5 of the New Hampshire Criminal Code, in connection with the 2002 death of Michael Warren. Brian did not resist, only stood frozen, staring blankly. As he was handcuffed, he said softly, "I knew this day would come." Claire did not respond, only nodded to the officers to lead him away. Inside the house, the technical team seized additional documents, electronic devices, and several old sealed envelopes from the Carroll County Sheriff's Department, evidence that Brian had retained investigation files from the original case. At the same time, in a southern Conway neighborhood, another team approached Denise Warren's home. She lived alone, working as an accountant for a small company. When police knocked, Denise initially appeared calm, but upon hearing the charges of insurance fraud and complicity in concealing a crime, her face went pale. "No, that can't be." "I didn't know anything," she said, but did not resist being handcuffed. Inside, police seized her personal computer, bank statements, and old insurance files bearing her and Brian Easton's signatures. News of the 2 arrests spread rapidly within hours. By afternoon, WMUR-TV Manchester and the Boston Globe both published initial articles with nearly identical headlines. New Hampshire cold case. 2 suspects arrested after nearly 20 years in Lake Chocorua disappearance. The 2002 photos, the vehicle salvaged from the lake, police standing on the ice, were rebroadcast on television, with a ticker reading, "Former officer and insurance beneficiary, face manslaughter and fraud charges." The town of Conway, quiet through the summer, was enveloped in unease. Residents gathered outside town hall, talking incessantly. Many who had known the Easton father and son could not believe it. James Easton was a symbol of integrity in the force, one resident said on local television. No one thought he'd be involved in covering up his son's crime. In Tamworth, where Brian once lived, neighbors recalled that for years he kept to himself, rarely socializing, only occasionally seen fishing on the Bear Camp River. The very place police, now confirmed as the starting point of the tragedy. In a brief press conference at State Police Headquarters, Prosecutor Hanley confirmed, "We have sufficient grounds to believe Michael Warren's death was not an accident. Physical, financial, and testimonial evidence all indicate intentional concealment of the truth and profiteering from the victim's death." Beside her, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly did not speak, only stood still, face tense. When asked by reporters about possible additional prosecutions, Hanley said only, "The investigation remains ongoing and expanding." That evening in Conway, television news vans lit up the small street leading to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. Dozens of reporters and residents waited at the gate as the convoy carrying Brian arrived. He stepped out in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, head bowed, walking between 2 officers. From a distance, camera flashes fired continuously. A reporter shouted, "Do you have any regrets, Brian?" But he did not answer. Only the faint clink of chains echoed on the wet concrete. In the adjacent detention area, Denise was brought in minutes later, face ashen, hair disheveled, still silent. In the detention report, she was listed as accomplice with financial motive and personal connection to the primary suspect. Claire observed the entire procedure from the glass room above. As the iron door closed, she felt both relief and a heavy weight. Nearly 20 years later, the final pieces of the Lake Chocorua disappearance had finally become a full criminal case. The next morning, all local television stations opened their newscasts with the same line: former New Hampshire state police officer arrested in 2002 disappearance case, shocking the entire state. In Conway, residents remained stunned. A case thought closed beneath cold ice had now resurfaced, like an old wound torn open, reminding everyone that sometimes justice does not vanish. It only waits long enough to return. On September 10, 2021, nearly a month after the arrests that shook the state, New Hampshire State Prosecutor Elizabeth Hanley officially released a 30-plus page indictment, closing the preliminary investigation phase of the Michael Warren case. In a press conference at the state courthouse in Concord, she read each charge slowly and deliberately before dozens of reporters, cameras, and local residents watching live on television. Brian Easton is charged with 2 counts, second-degree manslaughter, under Section 632 of the New Hampshire Criminal Code, for causing the death of Michael Warren on December 22, 2002, and obstruction of justice under Section 642(1), for actively destroying, altering, and staging the scene to conceal the crime. The prosecutor paused, scanning the crowd of reporters, then continued. Denise Warren is charged with 2 counts, insurance fraud under Section 638(20), and conspiracy to conceal criminal activity under Section 629(3). The allegations state that Mrs. Warren intentionally provided false information to obtain a $1.75 million life insurance payout and colluded with Brian Easton to obstruct the investigation into her husband's death. Immediately after the press conference, the full case file was transferred to Carroll County Court, which would handle the preliminary hearing. Copies of the indictment were made public, including over 200 pages of evidence, statements, and forensic reports. The opening lines of the indictment read, "Evidence shows that the death of citizen Michael J. Warren was not accidental, but the result of violent conduct during an argument, followed by scene staging and financial profiteering." The indictment detailed the sequence of events from Michael's morning meeting with Brian at Bear Camp River, to the vehicle being pushed into Lake Chocorua, to the Easton father and son's concealment during the 2002 investigation. Beyond Brian's confession, the prosecution presented 3 main evidence groups: 1, mechanical traces on the vehicle, proving it was pushed, not freely sliding; 2, recovered Pentax film photos confirming a staged scene; 3, the $120,000 transfer from Denise to Brian, proving post-incident financial motive. Prosecutor Hanley emphasized that although Brian claimed no intent to kill, failing to call emergency services, moving the body, and staging the scene demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Under state law, second-degree manslaughter carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Meanwhile, Denise faces up to 20 years if convicted of fraud and conspiracy. On September 13, Brian and Denise were brought to the preliminary hearing at the Carroll County Justice Center in Ossipee. That morning, security around the courthouse was tightened. Residents from Conway and Tamworth arrived in large numbers, forming long lines outside. As they were escorted into the courtroom, Brian wore an orange jumpsuit, head down, silent. Denise followed, hands trembling slightly, disheveled hair covering half her face. Before television cameras, the two avoided eye contact. Presiding Judge Robert Callahan confirmed receipt of the full file and officially advanced the case to criminal prosecution. He read briefly, "Preliminary evidence is sufficient for a jury trial. Defendants have the right to remain silent and to counsel." Brian responded only, "I understand." Denise choked out, "I never meant to kill anyone." Their attorneys requested bail, but the prosecution opposed due to risk of evidence destruction or witness tampering. The judge denied the request and ordered detention without bail until the formal trial. That day, WMUR and Boston Herald broadcasts aired courtroom footage with the headline, "Lake Chocorua Case. Justice After 19 Years." An editorial in the Concord Monitor wrote, "This is not just a murder case, it is a story of silence within the law enforcement system and greed disguised beneath winter ice." In Conway, residents remained in shock. Many who knew the Warren family expressed sympathy mixed with anger. "If it's true," a neighbor of Denise told a reporter, "then she looked her husband in the eye all those years and stayed silent." Former colleagues of Brian in the old police force were also summoned for additional questioning, including those who confirmed former Sheriff James Easton intervened in processing the 2002 file. When the indictment was officially posted at Carroll County Court, the Michael Warren case was regarded as one of the largest cold cases solved in New Hampshire history. The victim's name, nearly forgotten for 2 decades, now appeared densely in the press, a cold reminder that justice may come late, but never disappears. The trial of the state of New Hampshire versus Brian Easton and Denise Warren officially opened on the morning of November 8, 2021, at Carroll County Court in Ossipee. Nearly 20 years after Michael Warren vanished, the courtroom was packed, from major network reporters and local journalists to Conway residents who had followed the case from the beginning. A heavy atmosphere enveloped the gallery. The sound of flipping pages and scribbling pens mingled with the steady rain outside, like a cold rhythm, underscoring the belated confrontation between truth and guilt. Judge Robert Callahan presided, with 12 jury members carefully selected over the prior 2 weeks. The prosecution was led by Elizabeth Hanley. Defense for Brian Easton was attorney Gregory Tate, while Denise was represented by Sandra Lee, a specialist in civil law and financial fraud. In her opening statement, Prosecutor Hanley spoke firmly. "The state of New Hampshire is not just prosecuting 2 individuals, we are prosecuting a lie that lasted 19 years, built on cold ice, cut photographs, and silence." Evidence was presented in scientific sequence, one piece at a time, projected on the large screen in the center of the courtroom. First was the geological analysis, presented by Dr. Eleanor Briggs. She described comparing the tire soil sample to the stratigraphy of Lake Chocorua and the Bear Camp River area. The sample contains high ratios of hematite and feldspar, completely absent at Lake Chocorua. Conclusion: the vehicle was in the Bear Camp area before being pushed into the lake. A 3D simulation of the soil was shown, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. Next was fingerprint evidence, presented by the state criminal technician. Under multi-layer spectral light, the faint print on the driver's door was enlarged, matching 82% with Brian Easton's sample. There was no procedural reason for his fingerprint to be there, Hanley emphasized. Defense counsel attempted to argue Brian may have touched the vehicle while photographing the scene, but the prosecution countered immediately. Per 2002 procedure, photographers were not allowed to contact evidence. Moreover, the vehicle had not yet been located. What was he photographing if the scene did not yet exist? The third presentation was phone data, delivered by the carrier's telecommunications engineer. On screen was a signal map glowing with 2 points, one from Michael's phone, one from Brian's, both connecting to the Bear Camp Tower at 7:12 a.m. on December 22, 2002. "This cannot be coincidence," the prosecution asserted. They were in the same area at the exact time the victim disappeared. The most critical was the photographic evidence, the recovered Pentax film roll. Frames were shown sequentially: foggy lake surface, the CRV still on shore, 2 figures standing close. The final photo was enlarged in detail, timestamp 9:27 a.m., 2 hours after the missing person report. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Denise bowed her head, hands clenched, while Brian closed his eyes, shoulders trembling slightly. "This photo is the lie buried under ice," Hanley said. And the person who pressed the shutter was none other than the defendant. Finally came the mechanical evidence. Engineer Raymond Keller described axle damage, simulating external lateral force with a physical model. The vehicle was pushed left before sinking, engine off, transmission in N. This was deliberate. Results were cross-referenced with the final call between Michael and Brian, 7:12 a.m., the estimated submersion time. The two events occurred simultaneously, he concluded. Not by chance. When all evidence was presented, Prosecutor Hanley stepped to the center of the room, voice resolute, "We have scientific, financial, physical, and photographic data, all pointing one way. Brian Easton deliberately concealed Michael Warren's death, and Denise Warren profited from that act." Attorney Gregory Tate stood up. He did not refute the evidence, only speaking slowly. "My client does not deny the mistakes. He concealed, but he did not kill. It was an accident." Denise, at the other table, burst into tears upon hearing the word accident, while Sandra Lee tried to keep her client calm, arguing that Denise had no knowledge of the truth, only following the insurance company's guidance. But when the prosecution presented the bank statement showing the $120,000 transfer from Denise's account to Brian, just 4 months after the incident, all arguments grew weak. On November 16th, after 5 days of arguments, Judge Callahan allowed Brian to make a statement to the court. He stood, hands trembling, voice choked. "I killed a friend, unintentionally, but I concealed it. I lived in lies for 19 years. I plead guilty." The room fell silent. Denise bowed her head, tears streaming, but still repeated in a weary voice, "I didn't know. I didn't know anything." The jury deliberated for over 3 hours. At 5:40 p.m., they returned with the verdict. Brian Easton, guilty of second-degree manslaughter and obstruction of justice. Denise Warren, guilty of insurance fraud, insufficient evidence for conspiracy complicity. On November 18th, Judge Callahan pronounced sentence, considering defendant Brian Easton's full confession and cooperation with the investigation. The court sentences 15 years imprisonment at Concord Correctional Facility. For defendant Denise Warren, considering personal factors and circumstances, the court imposes a 6-year suspended sentence, community supervision, and full restitution of the insurance payout. As the gavel struck, the dry echo spread throughout the room. Brian bowed his head slightly, saying nothing. Denise burst into sobs. Escorted out by court staff, Prosecutor Hanley closed the file before her, while Claire Donnelly sat silently, eyes on the old photo of Lake Chocorua on the screen. 20 years of waiting, justice had finally been named, late but not astray. In December 2021, 3 weeks after the sentences were handed down, the cold case unit of the New Hampshire Department of Justice held a 2-day internal meeting in Concord to summarize the entire investigation process of the Michael Warren case, regarded as a typical example of errors in missing persons investigations from the early 2000s. Lieutenant Claire Donnelly presented a report over 70 pages thick, simply titled, "Lessons from Lake Chocorua." The document opened with a short but weighty statement. It was not technology that failed us. It was procedure that failed justice. The report divided into 4 main error groups, all stemming from basic shortcomings in the 2002 investigation process. The first error, according to Claire, was failure to properly secure the scene. When the disappearance was reported, the area around Lake Chocorua was only temporarily cordoned with warning tape for the first 24 hours, then left open for residents and volunteers to enter freely. Dozens of footprints, tire marks, and objects were disturbed without any inventory records. When the technical team arrived 2 days later, Claire presented, they no longer had the ability to identify initial traces. The scene was completely compromised, rendering remaining samples worthless. The second error was failure to examine soil and material samples, which 19 years later became the evidence that opened the entire investigation. In the report, Claire cited the old record, where Sergeant James Easton noted hold for comparison, not sent to lab. She said, "If that sample had been examined at the time, we could have detected the geological difference, realized the vehicle had been elsewhere before sinking. A simple test could have changed the entire case." The third error group involved overlooking communication data. In 2002, Mobile phones were already widely used, but investigators still viewed communication information as unnecessary in disappearances without criminal signs. Files showed no request to the carrier for call logs or tower locations. The two final calls between Michael and Brian, Claire emphasized, were in the system from day one, but it took nearly 2 decades for us to retrieve them. 19 years lost due to one overlooked request. The fourth error group, more systemic, was lack of cross-supervision and independent verification in internal investigations. When James Easton, the suspect's father, commanded the scene, no mechanism required him to hand over or undergo checks from another unit. One person with decision-making authority, personal ties to the suspect, and full control over evidence collection. That was the fatal flaw in the oversight system, the report stated. This concentration of power made scene staging easy and undetected. From these 4 error groups, Claire proposed a new standard procedure for investigating disappearances in winter conditions or involving ice, including 12 specific points. Notable ones: 1. Automatically assign an independent investigation team when a suspect or related person is in law enforcement. 2. Secure the scene within a minimum 300-meter radius within 2 hours of report receipt. 3. Mandatory storage and examination of all soil, water, and materials on vehicles or victims' shoes, regardless of classification as accident or criminal. 4. Require retrieval of phone data and tower locations for all disappearances over 24 hours. 5. Create an interagency database between cold case unit, state police, and forensics to prevent file and scene photo loss. The report also recommended establishing winter training programs for local police, focusing on ice scene preservation techniques, trace identification in low temperatures, and handling degradable evidence. Claire concluded, "We cannot change what happened to Michael Warren, but we can ensure no one else disappears and is forgotten under the ice without being found." On December 15th, the report was submitted to the Governor of New Hampshire and the Federal Department of Justice. In a brief press conference, the state spokesperson announced, starting 2022, all disappearances in ice and snow conditions will follow the new standard procedure proposed by the cold case unit. On the table, the original Michael Warren file cover was placed beside the newly printed report, different paper colors, but the same title. Chocorua, 2002. As the meeting ended, Claire Donnelly stood silently looking out the office window. Outside, the first snow began falling, covering the parking lot in white. She thought of the 2002 mistakes, people, decisions that seemed small but buried the truth for 2 decades. In her notebook, Claire wrote the final line of the summary report. "Our greatest lesson is not in the crime, but in the complacency of believing justice can wait." In January 2022, exactly 20 years since Michael Warren disappeared, the New Hampshire Department of Justice officially issued the decision to close cold case #02-1747, ending what was considered one of the longest investigation errors in the state's judicial history. The 4-page decision, stamped red by the chief prosecutor, stated clearly, "Official conclusion, negligent homicide with scene concealment and financial fraud." Below, an additional note confirmed permanent archiving with status, solved. April 2021. In the summary sent to the entire judicial system, Lieutenant Claire Donnelly wrote, "The truth sank beneath the ice for nearly 2 decades, but was never lost." The Michael Warren case affirms that even a soil sample, a film roll, or the smallest geological discrepancy can become the key to reopening justice. That statement was later widely quoted in criminal investigation publications and became a classic example of modern forensic science's role in restoring old evidence. Much of the case's success was credited to the state forensics lab, which applied new techniques, spectral scanning for stratigraphy, chemical restoration of damaged film, and micro-DNA analysis. Thanks to this, the evidence chain overlooked in 2002, soil sample, film photos, faint fingerprints, was reconstructed and proven logically linked between physical elements and criminal acts. In the final technical report, the expert team noted clearly, no technology replaces careful procedure, but technology perfects it. Forensics is not just a support tool, it is the language of truth. The case also marked a turning point in New Hampshire's investigation reforms. From mid-2021, standard procedures for scene preservation, ice-snow environment examination, and communication data cross-checking were implemented across the state police system. The Police Training Academy in Concord opened a new course titled Winter Scene Management, using the Chocorua case as a mandatory real-world scenario. A 6-month monitoring report showed average missing persons processing time reduced by 30%, and evidence retrieval in harsh weather doubled. Beyond technical aspects, the case changed public perception of investigation. The discovery that the suspect's father, former Sheriff James Easton, directly commanded the initial case forced the state to issue new regulations. Any case involving related personnel must be transferred to an independent unit. An internal oversight committee was also established, chaired by the Attorney General, to prevent conflicts of interest in similar cases. In March 2022, at the Cold Case Unit commendation ceremony, the governor stated, "We cannot change the past, but we can correct it with persistence and integrity." The Michael Warren case was not just solved, it helped New Hampshire rewrite its standards for justice. Lieutenant Claire Donnelly was recognized for leading the investigation, and the forensics expert team received the state's Medal of Honor. In the archives at the Department of Justice headquarters in Concord, the dark brown cover of Cold Case #02-1747 file was affixed with a new label, "Resolved by Forensic Reanalysis and Cross-Departmental Investigation 2021. Inside, among hundreds of pages of reports and scene photos, the restored Pentax film copy remained, the evidence that unlocked the entire truth. As she signed the final line of the conclusion report, Claire paused for a long while. In the quiet room, the pen's scratch mingled with the cold wind whistling through the glass window. She thought of Lake Chocorua, of the day the snow melted, when the water first revealed the vehicle after nearly 20 years, and of the people who lived, lied, died, or repented. Justice sometimes arrives slowly, but it never loses its way. On January 12, 2022, the file was sealed and transferred to the state's digital archive. The final line on the official record read, "Cold Case #02-1747, Michael Warren, status, solved. Cause, negligent homicide with concealment and financial fraud. Closed by Lieutenant Claire Donnelly, Cold Case Unit, January 2022. And thus, the Chocorua case ended, not with a gunshot, but with a small line affirming that truth, though buried under ice, is ultimately rewritten in the light of justice. The story of the Michael Warren case in Conway, New Hampshire, is not just a criminal tale of guilt and concealment. It clearly reflects how American society today still grapples with the boundary between trust, responsibility, and truth. 20 years buried beneath the ice of Lake Chocorua symbolized not only one man's death, but the paralysis of the system when personal trust overrode professional procedure. Sergeant James Easton let fatherly affection lead him to conceal evidence, resulting in justice delayed nearly 2 decades. In a society that values transparency like the United States, this story reminds us that professional ethics and individual integrity remain the irreplaceable foundation for any equipment, law, or technology. The second lesson comes from Lieutenant Claire Donnelly, representing a new generation of investigators who believe in the power of forensic science and data. Those seemingly cold tools, soil sample, Pentax film, cell tower signals, became the voice for the deceased. In an era where technology dominates every aspect of life, the case shows that proper use of technology can restore faith in justice, as long as it is operated by people with conscience. Finally, the story reminds every American that justice does not come on its own. It requires persistence like Claire's and the courage of those willing to face mistakes head-on. From the frozen Lake Chocorua, the message rings clear: truth may be buried, but only when people stop searching does it truly vanish? If you believe justice always has its own path, please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more cases thought lost to oblivion. Thank you for following the Lake Chocorua story. See you in the next video, where truth is once again pulled from the darkness.